Hello.
Hello.
I think you just muted yourself, Adrian, by mistake. Hello. Is it me? It might be me. Boom, boom, boom. Let me see. No, it's you. I checked the stream. I can't hear you. And I don't think anybody on the stream can either. And we have some live commentary in chat already. Maybe it's just me. I'll. Aniket, hello. Signing in from. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Confirmed. Definitely confirmed. It's you, Adrian. I can see you talk. I don't see your microphone thing bouncing, so I would say wrong hardware input device. Something along those lines. Not audible, Adrian. Yes. Anyway, while Adrian is fixing his sound issues, I will let you know when I hear you. Until then, assume I can't. While Adrian is fixing his sound issues, we are having a continuous delivery at startups focused topic today. Adrian and I have been working, consulting, mentoring, and doing business with mostly small tech, startups, scale ups. And we'd like to talk about continuous delivery. It's one of our, let's say, primary topics on this channel. And we figured it would be helpful to re-emphasize context. That, CD is not the same in small tech, in smaller businesses, and startups compared to what you might be used to hearing from enormous mid-tech, large tech organizations, organizations with thousands of engineers and, entire government structures. Adrian and I work a lot in sort of small team environments where the teams are not necessarily static, and there's a lot of small teams wearing many hats, usually more hats than there's people in usually a team of 5 or 6 wearing 10 different hats, which requires a lot of ingenuity and a lot of creativity, and also a lot of platform engineering support to deal with growing complexity. Mostly e-commerce or e-commerce adjacent. SaaS. Adrian is also running a SaaS company right now.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
just relog. It was some kind of issue with StreamYard.
Yeah, you went silent the moment we went live, so it's probably software induced. Glad we got
Sorry
it
for
sorted.
that.
No problem. So what did I miss? Were you listening to the intro so far? No, it's gone again. No, still can't hear you. It was okay for a moment, and then whatever just happened, it's gone again. Giving it one more try. Hello and hello. What's that link? Let me open that link first. What is it? Man, but that's I think that's good. That's good. Good meme. Adrian is back in the studio.
Is it better? So I basically.
That's interesting. So the audio starts, it's fine, and then 2 seconds in, it's gone again. So I'm not sure. That seems odd. It seems software related. But I don't know what we can do about it. Are you muted? Mute, unmute. No. Was it echo cancellation? Technical difficulties. No, still can't hear you. No, I can hear myself now.
So.
But now it worked.
Now it works.
But now I can hear myself as well.
Yeah, because it's awful. Really, sorry for that, guys. It's pretty. I don't know what it is. I never had that. Okay, let's try that. So I've put the headphones in, but yeah, never mind. So you should be able to listen to me, maybe not in good quality, but so we can actually talk. Hopefully it works now. Okay.
It sounds better than before, so
really
nothing to worry about.
Good.
Okay.
Continuous delivery. I started the topic with the typical phrase of let's deploy on Friday, right? And I actually confident enough to do that. And I phrased the lack of confidence in that moment as a defect. And today we want to speak about that in particular in small tech startups or maybe the beginning of scale ups. So everything which is an actual smaller company, smaller tech team, but it still needs to be, let's say, performant in terms of creating value, getting feedback, being able to react to the market, and being able to do changes in the code quickly without doing weeks of pull requests until you get a feature out. And on the same time, don't break things. And that is the balance that most people are actually, not that confident. So that's the reason why I started with deploy on Friday with the idea of that, because I sent you the link real quick in the chat. So on LinkedIn chat, it is here. And for the others, it's here. And the idea is, can I deploy on Friday? So for example, so we are a company building actually a startup still, but it's probably like we translated from another company and call ourselves startup again. So it's a little bit middle ground, but we have our clients. Our clients are in the enterprise level in Germany, and on the enterprise level, and they expect that changes work. On the other hand, they expect, or we expect ourselves as well, because it's a SaaS product, that we need to be very fast in what we do. So we need to be able to, hey, we have an idea, let's test the idea, and let's give something to the client so that it can give us feedback before it gets to production. And that is oftentimes something we're talking about 1 or 2 days, not weeks. And how do you actually manage to not break your system by doing that? And it is the very same thing as deploying on Friday, which means that you
Yeah.
need to be able to deploy to any time basically necessary when you need to get some feedback. And this is the reason why I personally prefer continuous delivery, because you actually integrate several times a day and deploy at least once a day to production.
Mhm.
Get that feedback as well, right? And at least to some form of production, so that the clients get some form of feedback. So I had that today with Richard Smith on one of my posts, that he basically said that hardliners of continuous delivery will argue that if you don't deploy really to the production every day, it's not continuous delivery. If you deploy to some space where stakeholders can take a look at it, it might be a middle ground. And probably it is. So by definition, it is a middle ground or a gray zone or something like that. But it still implies the very same techniques, and it should not do anything to the confidence. You are in a releasable state, and that is what actually matters. Because getting to that state is the important thing. If you then actually deploy or not, yeah, it's the tip of the iceberg. I personally say that now. At least it is for us in the company. So we do deploy at least once in the end of the day, and we don't care in that moment about, hey, do we actually break things, because we are confident that we won't break things, and if we break things, they are not that hard. So very, let's say in a very specific niche thing, because we know where we have made changes and they are small, right? So that it could break there, even though, tests won't cover that or something like that, edge cases. And then we know we can basically fix that as soon as we get feedback, which means that you need to have a very good form of communication with your stakeholders as well. So make sure you get feedback, and it is not like people not telling you, or they writing down notes about what they want to tell you in 1 week or something like that. It is best if they then write you an email, send you a chat message or something like that. It is not working, or I see something is not working very well. Can you take a look at it? And then you immediately put that into your test suite and make sure it doesn't happen again. But that is actually more a kind of rare case. That's more like the when something fails thing, and that is the reason why we are still that we could break something. We are confident because normally we don't break the system, so it's not like we deploy and suddenly our app is just a white page or something like that. So that is not the case, right? And that is what people actually need, so that you are brave enough and keen enough to make changes to the system and test those changes, test those features. Maybe, so for example, you test a series of features for an e-commerce system, and there is a specific set of features. You have an idea, you want to validate the idea, and you start with the idea, and you already get the feedback that no one actually wants to have that stuff, right? And then you can stop developing that on day one, or say day two, or something like that, instead of developing for 2 weeks the entire feature, then testing it, release it, QA, you bring it out, and no one will have it. So you basically wasted time. Maybe those 2 weeks are not that bad for a Meng Fang whatever, but for a startup, that can make the night and day difference. If you do that several times a year, we're talking about several thousands or 10,000s even of dollars or euros or whatever kind of currency it will cost you, and it can cost actually life of the company if you do that wrong on a specific scale. So that is why we want to talk about that today. So that is a business aspect and the development aspect. So maybe we're going through continuous delivery in a nutshell, maybe as a starter for the developers in the channel or in the audience. So what is continuous delivery, why it is, and how is continuous delivery actually affecting the business, the startup world now, right? So your SaaS product, maybe your agency stuff as well would be the same. Especially in the agency part, you should have that, right? That's another topic I want to talk about later on. Okay, but start to waffling now. What do you think about that?
It's curious. Where do you find most of your clients sort of struggle with continuous delivery? Your clients where
you mean
either
mentoring and
that you're advising,
fellowship. Yeah. Okay. I think many want to do this in a natural way, so they try to get things as fast as possible. but they
What does that mean?
actually, it means what I said. It is like they want to know as early as possible if what they do is actually worth pursuing. It is basically
Mm-hmm.
bringing some value, and it's what they think it is. Because um, when you hear, or often people start with an idea, or they get
Mm-hmm.
some idea from someone else. So there is an idea, right? And typically, it's not the idea is not like, hey, we have an entire document with Figma files with everything predefined. It is so clear. We have even a market fit for that already, right? So it is
Mm-hmm.
more like, hey, I had an idea while I was driving. Let's do that. That's more like that kind of idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know if it's a 1 hour of work thing or a 2 weeks of work
Mm-hmm.
thing, because you simply don't know. It is like, it is a typical developing thing. So you develop an idea by while executing. So that is a new thing in the software development space in the last years, especially when the term startup came into a more prominent being. And in a very traditional sense, people would tend to plan more. That is how I started with software engineering. So when there was more time spent upfront planning than it was
Mm-hmm.
today. And you still have that in larger companies of where you need to do that, of course, because you need to allocate more
Mm-hmm.
budget and those kind of things. But in the startup space, it is very much like Wild West still. It's like we have an idea, let's try, or we have multiple ideas, let's try multiple
Yeah.
ideas. And where developers and entrepreneurs struggle in that space, when I know it, is they actually want to do this, but it is like they break things 1 or 2 times, and then their first clients they have are, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, pissed off. That's
So
what
what
it
do
is.
they do?
That's
So if they don't practice continuous delivery,
Mhm.
what do they do? Like they do something, but what is it that they are doing? Like, does it have a name?
Most are hiding still in some kind of Git flow like workflow, but no one is really
Mm-hmm.
using Git flow because no one understands Git flow entirely.
It's very complicated for no
It is,
benefit.
it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
But it is like the idea of branching, which became popular with Git, because in SVN it was crap to do that, so no one
It
did
was
that.
popular with SVN as well, but it was
Was
very
it?
costly. Yeah.
Who used that really?
I mean,
I,
everybody who had to, but it was very
who
costly.
had
It was
to
very
maybe,
slow.
yeah, but
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
people try to avoid that to that
I
time.
mean, I
And
remember we had, 15 years ago, using SVN in an engineering org with 50 employees and 20 engineers, we had 2 branches. We simply
yeah,
couldn't afford more.
yeah,
Too
it
much.
was a server-side solution back then. Oh,
Yeah,
still
yeah.
a server-side solution, and it was the feeling that every time you try to merge something, you basically missed something, and
Yeah,
it
just
was
having it was very space consuming. We had
yeah.
quite a large repository, so
Yeah,
with
it was
submodules.
used as well in the gaming industry back then for the large files, because it had this delta comparison stuff inside,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
Git didn't had to the time. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if it does have today. So it could basically take a look into binary files. But let's stay with the actual topic.
Mm-hmm.
So SVN was like, what to that time wasn't really like about branching, and then you had Atlassian coming with Git flow, because Git could, was the branching was quite easy, or is quite easy in Git,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a good thing. So we need
Well,
that in
Git made
continuous
merging
delivery as well.
easier. Branches
Merging,
became
yeah,
quicker, but merging became a lot easier, right? Because it sort
yeah,
of
it was more
it
transparent,
dipped.
more
Yeah,
easy to.
it was a little bit more clear on what's going on, and the change set got a lot smaller. So
Mhm.
Git in a way is sort of embodying continuous delivery more than SVN. SVN was built more on that sort of
Yeah,
long-lived
but interestingly, people
feature
then
branch.
started to use branches for features. And then
Mm-hmm.
there are clients who are very proud that every of their
Mm-hmm.
branch is basically a
One of
production,
the
not a testing release as well, which is automatically deployed on some services and some
one of the
magic
things that
clients and stuff like
surprised
that.
me a lot is how popular pull requests became. Um, it was very weird for me, sort of getting used to it, because I used to review code that was in branches without pull requests.
Yeah,
Originally.
we still don't use pull requests as a tool in our
Yeah.
company today. We never used it because I feel
But it
it's
became very popular, in a way.
it did
Even
together with the
companies,
branching and Git flow thing,
yeah,
because part of
yeah,
the Git flow was it was called merge request then, not pull request, because
yeah,
merge
yeah.
request by Atlassian's speech. And the terminology then from other platforms like GitHub Actions and GitHub itself.
And they had a
was
tool
pull
for that,
request.
which is extremely expensive. Crucible.
Okay, I don't know that one. So
Yeah, they had Crucible and Fisheye. It was, you had Jira
Fisheye, I
and
remember
Crucible and Fisheye. And
Yeah.
Crucible was the code review tool, like the collaborative pair programming and reviewing tool, the stack dipping, stack ranking of the tickets, and sort of connecting them to epics and giving comments. And like GitHub really popularized and made it essentially free to have like a really strong commenting system on top of
Well, today
change
you
sets.
have that in every IDE, right? So
yeah. But back then, this was like a $5,000 per seat for a small company.
And then you had TreeView or
it was crazy.
SourceTree that came out as
Something similar. Yeah. But it didn't take on. Like the technology came, it was too expensive, and then GitHub gave it for free, and then everybody started using it.
You still need to have some pull requests. So just to make clear, we actually use pull requests in our workflow, but for a very specific case, not for what it's actually meant to do, because it is easier to run a pull request to merge to production for us than it's actually to merge to production via Git commands. But no one is actually reviewing those. So it's more like.
But back to my question, like, what are they doing if they're not following continuous delivery?
Yeah, it's basically hiding in branches now. In short,
but is that decision deliberate?
What do you mean by deliberate?
Well, is that decision deliberate? Is that, is that default, like just organic behavior, or did someone decide?
No reluctance, hesitance, and fear. It is basically that. So it's a little bit like, especially project managers are very like, don't break things. I need to go into the meeting with the clients. Please, developer, don't break things. And
because the expectation is that releases are unstable by nature.
Yeah, it is. So we have a partnered company who is still releasing every half year because they are so afraid of releases, and many of the processes are not streamlined. It's very much like a lot of manual migration stuff, and they are all like, we need to communicate that. And the problem is they had when you had some bad experience with your customers, with your actual end customers.
Yeah, you go demo something in a live system.
Especially in the B2B area, when they say, you need to tell us when you make an update so we can be there and revalidating that one. And that makes you not using continuous delivery because you need to do that every day. So
but it's coming from a lack of trust.
It is a lack of trust and a lack of confidence then, of course, on both sides. And that is how you actually get back to the point is kind of interesting. It's possible, but you need to do that. You really need to bridge the gap between business and development. This is one of my favorite topics of 2024, because that is actually not just a leadership topic. It is actually going into the continuous delivery as well.
I mean, let's face it. It is primarily a leadership topic. A developer is 95%. I mean, if I look at your employees, 95% of their productivity depends on decisions that you have made in the past 2 years.
Yeah, but not when it comes to talk to clients about or other stakeholders about how things should be done. So there is no. So for ourselves, there is no project manager, which means that we basically discuss things. It is a little bit in the direction of monotasking. So the team does have one task. So one larger task, maybe some subtask and split offs or something like that.
That's a great practice. Yeah.
But
that's typical Kanban, right? So that's what Kanban should be. Yeah.
We don't tend to follow methodologies. It's more like we use it in a natural way, which makes sense for common sense for everyone. And so you basically go and say that, hey, when a developer does need to do something, there is a counterpart on the other side. Some stakeholders, maybe inside the company, outside the company, or even one company after that. And that is what I mean, bridge the developer. So we have constellations where there is a large a large enterprise unit, and there is the enterprise mother, so the parent company around that. And
Mm-hmm.
then are we actually there as well. So we have that developers are actually working directly with the parent company without the involvement of everyone else. We are that far in the continuous delivery process.
But
So develop.
I mean, in the context of your clients that you advise on continuous delivery, I think that would be a little bit more interesting because, let
Mhm.
let's assume that most of our audience is not doing continuous delivery, or let's ask
What?
them. Let's ask them.
Please, guys, come on. What's going on?
Put a one in chat if you're
In
actively
which
doing
branch do you
continuous
hide
delivery.
these this week? Come on, please type in the chat. How is the branch called you're hiding this week?
What is the branch called?
No, just joking.
One of the metrics I like to check, just as a sort of health check for teams that I coach, is how many unmerged branches do you have right now? And it's usually a very good telltale sign. If they tell me, oh, I don't know, I would have to go and count, then it's already, that already gives me the right answer.
We have only for experimental things. So when we, for example, I've made a video about Next.js
No, but that's
upgrades and
fine.
Vite upgrades,
That's fine.
and then I basically made a migration to Vite. So I had a branch. I don't want to have that in the trunk. It was just for me for experimental purposes, and that's fine. But that will never be remerged, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean,
with the live
that's
branch.
something you build and throw away to build
Yeah.
knowledge. There's nothing wrong with that. That's primarily what branches were created for, so that you could fork the code, you could learn from it, and then you could delete the fork. If you go through the effort of creating a full copy of your branch, it is preferable that you never merge it, right? So
I would have
and
a question for the audience. How is it actually? Do you use continuous delivery or something very similar, or are you actually more in a typical branching type of workflow with
it's a lot of
let's say,
questions.
yeah. So do you use the continuous delivery or not? Can you please type it into the chat just to give us a little bit of feedback? That would be interesting. Actually, we have some people here. Okay. Yeah, so just to wrap up that topic regarding that one, the biggest problem is actually hiding in branches and having that non or low trust environments where you have a lot of people in a row and the developers don't even know the people who actually ordered that stuff, right? That is one of these problems. And the closer you get that, and that is why I said it's, in my opinion, not only a leadership topic to bridge the gap between business and development, because the closer you get that, the easier you will implement or even migrate from continuous delivery to continuous delivery. That is, I don't know a way to implement that flawlessly without changing or bridging the gap. I don't know how. Because
No, the organization does need to shift, but there are many different ways you can go about it. I think, and I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think it's a good. There are many different ways of how to go from dysfunction to, to bridging the gap, as you mentioned, right?
I'm
Because
preparing a board right now. I want to show something.
okay,
Because wait a second. So present. Share
because
screen.
from the
Window.
perspective of the engineers working with stakeholders, there is very little that needs to be done to enable continuous delivery. It's mostly about dysfunctions that are present and needless process that is present that is preventing continuous delivery, right? So it's this core idea that we can do continuous delivery if nobody interferes, but usually there's a lot of interference, and it's getting past that sort of ingrained, almost cultural, traditional sense of interference that is really in the sort of, I don't know, the capital A agile community has this sort of cult for calling everything transformations, but really it's about following the demand. It's I like the flow engineering and the team topologies movements sort of focus on work rather than work and flow rather than structure and process. And to me,
I want to show something which I see very often is the thing in between. In between. A second.
Hang on, I'm talking about organizational culture right now. Is this going to be relevant, or are we talking past each other on two different topics?
I don't know. I wanted to show something.
Okay.
So in continuous delivery, we have the trunk. So let's make this a little bit more prominent here. The trunk is important. That is an important aspect. So imagine you're a company who's willing to go there. And then you have your dev team. And the left-hand side is dev, right? So we make it as dev. That's development. And we have, on the other side, we have business. So biz. So those are two worlds in many companies. That's still a problem. And in between sits the famous person, the PM, oftentimes tries to be the person who is in between and makes sure that everything is running. But in reality, it looks a little bit different. It's an overwhelmed person who is get blamed from both sides. And that's one of the problems.
That's good. That's a good show of accountability. So far, the PM's role, I wouldn't say is problematic here.
So let's quickly take a look what real so that is the bad one. So let's have the better one would be like you actually don't need that person. You can have that, but you don't need. You still have this one here, but it is actually a little bit more transparent. You don't have that one, but that goes directly to production. Basically, as soon as you push, that is, you have developers working with trunk goes to production, stakeholder sees that. That is continuous delivery in a nutshell. Then you have continuous pre-delivery. I don't know how to call that.
Why are you differentiating this? Like, why is...
But this is because you asked me what the problem out there is, what I see, and I describe it. So you have that one. So basically the developers stay in the cycle of it theoretically being in a releasable state and having everything on staging continuously. So they work, staging, work, staging, work, staging. But this thing, that is the problematic thing. This is only done sometimes. And that, so there's basically not everything which is pushed to that one is basically going to production. And that is the problem with most. So, and the reason is, in theory, it would be possible. So the developers don't have the problem to push that. So they even are confident enough oftentimes to do that. But the project manager says, we have 10 tickets and we have 10 features. Please now release only that one. And the problem is that you need to have then feature flags instead, because you don't have your release stages. But they want to have it like, but the stakeholders shall take a look at this system with feature flags here and then partially deploy it to that system.
Yeah.
So in theory, that would work, but then the entire business side must be on board, because there is so many things conflicting in that moment that people say, but yeah, we need to have this feature. And then they say, we need to change this during development. And then we only need to have a part of this feature, but in the other one. And please merge it right now. And just so they basically distract the entire cycle, because the decision making, and that's the problem, is on the right-hand side, not on the left-hand side. In a real continuous delivery environment, which works even from small to enterprise level communication, like it is with us, then everyone needs to be in that decision-making process. Because you can't simply say imperatively from biz to dev, hey, how it's been done. Because then you basically say, oh, we need to change something, please do that, and then deploy. And then suddenly you can't. So you spend more time fiddling out your feature flags, rolling back versions, try to get things somehow done, that this is actually a totally blocking process. This is what I see basically every time when a company tries to implement CI/CD, continuous delivery, when business is disconnected from development. That's what I see. And what I see is working is when business and development are actually one thing, so it's dev biz, and you don't have that here. So that is totally unnecessary at that moment. So you basically say, please change
I prefer
something.
this. Like for me, that barrier and the labels, I think the biggest minus on the... I don't mind as much on staging and production. To me, when I'm coaching teams, I don't differentiate between that because it doesn't solve the problem, right? So if the feedback that the devs are looking for is, hey, is this technically possible? Not do we want to release it, but is it even possible? If you're doing a POC, then deploying to staging is enough because it'll give them feedback, right? So I wouldn't say that, but also in a different, to contrast what you said, deploying to production also may not be enough, right? Because the underlying, I know you did this implicitly because you and I work together a lot and we talk a lot, but as someone who's just looking at this diagram, it's not clear why deploying to production helps. And the way you described it, we also didn't touch on what the important element is. The important element is that the work log, the backlog of the team, of what they are working on next, depends on how the deployment goes. That's the most important aspect.
That is the core aspect of that one as well. So, for example,
so let me finish so that I can have a coherent thought. Now that I jumped over to your topic. Thank you. It has to do with this idea that if you have pre-planned all work and deployment doesn't change the plan, that means you're not learning anything from the deployment. That means you're not taking in any feedback. That means the deployment was probably pointless, which means that there's a bigger underlying issue, which is that the team has no feedback loop. Right? So the problem isn't not deploying to production. The problem is the team doesn't have a feedback loop. They are working in isolation. The problem isn't that they're working on a feature branch. The problem isn't that they're working on staging. The problem isn't that they are or are not working on production. The problem is when we deploy, we need to learn something. So the plan of what we work on next ideally has to change. Because that way we act on new business information. We're reacting to the market, or we're responding and even preempting and acting on new ideas that we've discovered. We are acting on new knowledge. So we're being proactive rather than being reactive. Otherwise,
but we are talking about the exact same thing. But you talk.
Yes, but I'm just saying that like the key element from like the top that's missing is the batch size, right? Which you've now added, right?
So what's really actually just to have it a little bit more like transparent. So imagine you have that arrow here, which is a small batch that's having the same color, and you have more. Oh shit.
Tony mentioned in chat that the text is really hard to read.
Yeah, I fixed that already, I think. So you have multiple of those running at the same time. They are extremely fast, right? So you have small batches, like every time you do that. The problem with the one above is if you have two of them at the same time. Again, it's a little bit awkward.
So two features that were co-deployed, built in parallel, or built in sequence by the same team, but not deployed as it was finished. Right. So that's how you would get two arrows in parallel without having been deployed.
Exactly. The problem here often is that when you have bad communication, then the development is actually working until this point, and business people looking to that point. So that's another aspect. So it is not very clear, and that's the reason why we have large batch sizes, because there is no. So if you have no communication between biz and developers, then you have large batch sizes, because they try to pre-define everything, which is then a large batch, and you get that. So you try to do small implementations, but business is then not caring because they expect a large batch, and you just deliver them a small one. So it is better when biz is expecting small, and understands today we do this, tomorrow we do this, and 3 days we do this. Maybe it takes longer. Maybe not, right? So we will take a look. And then we are more flexible, and we actually act as dev and biz as one unit, and we get things done. And this is where you can actually get feedback, because that is the first iteration. We get that on the first day, right? And biz is already telling us on first day about that one, so we can make this already in another color, because we know we need to change of
Mhm.
the first day. That is not
Yep.
possible because that's even wrong. That's one batch size. That's one,
Yeah.
right? And you only know that after the entire batch was delivered. And most of the time, that's another aspect, is what I posted about estimations. So you get
Don't get me
this. So
started on estimations. We need to do a full episode on
BIS
estimations.
throws this at Dev. Dev says, and they forced them to tell how long does it take? 3 weeks. And they said, okay, you get that done in 3 weeks. Dev is stressed. And then they try to do that. After 3 weeks, they don't get it done. It doesn't get over. They are pissed because of them. Hey, you have committed. Are you incompetent? What's going on with you? And you say, oh, it took longer because it actually looks like this now. And what's next, right? So it takes 4 weeks, and you don't have that because you do it in iterations, because it will never be surprisingly, even if it is more like the last one is becoming now more of a fat one. It's even more solid, right? It doesn't matter. You know that here or even here already, and not at the end of that one. And that is what makes it so less stressful to work in DevBiz, or aka continuous delivery, for everyone who's not knowing what we're talking about, because here's no labeling about that. So if we put some labels here, then is that basically that's good CD, right? So actually, how I understand it, and that is bad whatever. It's just like, I don't have a name for that. That's basically bad traditional. I don't know how to call it. Let's
Well, that's why I asked, right, at the very beginning, because the labels would help. Because it's very easy, it's very easy to get distracted in this sort of terminology wars where I ask you, hey, do you do continuous integration, continuous delivery? And I get an answer back saying, yeah, we have a CI/CD tool. And then I have to go back and say, well, hold on, that's not what I asked. Well, what do you mean you have a CI/CD tool? Like, it's my bad. Sorry, I should have asked, for a task that takes 1 day to develop, do you deploy it the same day? That's what I really wanted to know, right? I don't care if you're using a CI/CD tool.
Yeah, I had that on YouTube. There was one comment on YouTube actually, who that one CTO consultant person, I don't know, told me that it was on Substack. Told me that
Let me find it.
CI/CD is a little bit like automation is not everything. So many people perceive CD as an automation, but it's not primarily an automation. A part of CD is an automation part. That is then, in fact, some practices about that in automation, of course. But CD is more like a set of practices, which could be a form of methodology, if you like, but it is a set of practices which you need to follow. And that's, in my opinion, as well, outside of, as I described right now, works best when you span it even outside of development. Then it actually starts to work and make sense, right? And as you said, it is something which goes more to the original agile idea, because it's more like, it is very compatible with the idea of extreme programming in that moment. And the modern capital A agile is not. The modern capital agile is more up here. So you have these large batch sizes, aka the sprint.
Capital A agile is a Ponzi scheme, selling certifications and basically making money off of your fear of missing out on the next certificate and having to renew. And you need credits, and you need to have a coach, and your coach needs to be doing workshops and has to be attending conferences. It's a Ponzi scheme. Like, it's not practical in that sense. I mean, it helps spread the word, but it also dilutes the value. So I don't want to badmouth them, in a way that, there has been a, net negative, a sort of a net positive, but I don't appreciate, let's say, the sort of fear-driven.
Those don't work, actually.
Certifications
I never saw a single example where this is actually working well. Okay, so that is in a nutshell as a definitions of about today what we're talking about actually. So that is how it works. So maybe I will do that in on my blog as a more fine graphic, let's say, more better labeled with description. I probably will do that. It's quite an interesting thing to make that more visible, because many people simply don't understand what that is. Very quickly, if you don't know that page, it's extremely interesting to take
Minimum
a look
CD,
at
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is gives you a great overview of what it
I mean,
actually technically is.
I do have to mention you can do CD without automation, but generally, in theory you could, but generally your work, when you're at the right level, when you're at the right batch size, so at a very small batch size, your work tends to be so fast that you simply have to do way too much automation. Way too much manual sort of logistics to get things deployed continuously. And nowadays, deployment, like continuous deployment, is a solved problem. So it would, you basically incur a opportunity cost, especially as a startup. We're doing this in the context of startups. From my perspective, the biggest. I talked about this yesterday on like an experimental TDD related live stream, where the biggest problem with CD adoption in startups is not so much that the tooling is not there, or that the processes is not there, or that the interest is not there, but there is an underlying value structure where people have been burnt before, so they overvalue manual inspection. Right? So when somebody says, "Hey, I'm doing a demo tomorrow," check that everything's gonna be okay, and that check is manual. And there is this perception that the manual check is of higher quality than the automated check, especially if the automation is lacking, because we need to basically make the code self-testing in order for the automation to be better than a human. The problem is that it's very easy for a human to make a mistake, and when they do make a mistake, it's very easy for them not to report the mistake. So it just creates this false sense of confidence, which is where then all the bugs are coming from, right? It's like, hey, you checked, you said everything's going to be okay, and then there was an issue with the demo. To resolve the issue with the demo, we had to deploy something real quick last minute, and then all hell breaks loose, right? So that's usually that trajectory of, like, we didn't want to touch it because we thought everything was okay, and we said, okay, now everything is okay, don't touch it. We were wrong. So the thing that can be deployed, the vessel that carries the bug fix in case there is something wrong, now also carries a bunch of features that were frozen. So then that request from the stakeholders comes in of, oh, we were wrong, it's not okay, I need a hotfix, but only that. Like, don't also deploy everything that was frozen, because now you're working on this sort of death spiral of mistrust. So now you want to control what's being rolled out, because everything that wasn't rolled out fast enough is now declining very rapidly in quality and reliability, because it wasn't rolled out, because it required feedback to make stable. And it is that lack of the feedback loop that then creates this lack of trust, because software that is created outside, software that is created with a long feedback loop is inherently unstable, because it's very difficult to spec it out correctly.
Sanjeev was there. Hey, Sanjeev.
You want to touch on anything else?
Yeah, of course. We have more topics. More about that one. So, that was so specifically back to the fear of deploy on Friday, already specific day. So we have now a good idea in the audience as well. Why? So because if those things aren't working, so if we don't know exactly if we can deploy, it's not only if our code breaks, is it actually what the client wants, or the stakeholder or the other side wants?
Yeah.
Is it actually okay to deploy a feature right now because they want to have 5 features on that day, but suddenly they want only one, and one was changed, and every of these features are at the same time on trunk, so you need to deploy them simultaneously, because it is the same version, right? And even if you have that in branches or not, that is something which doesn't help you. And if you implement continuous delivery, as I said, business and development, then it is clear that we don't make those mishmashes. So we say, okay, we decide for some small thing and we're going out with a small thing. And we don't want to have that small thing anymore. We remove that small thing again. But we don't mix match 5 things on a day to gather things and put them down. So the core ingredient, in my opinion, is trust. And you need to rebuild trust as early as possible in the process to actually implement CD effectively. I never saw a single example to implement CD in an environment where trust is low. It simply doesn't work because maybe it works for the dev team, which is then having some form of continuous integration. Maybe they deploy something to some staging and test it, but they don't dare to put that into delivery. That is the problem. So there is no feedback from outside. So as soon as you get feedback from outside, you are in the realm of continuous delivery, right? One might argue if that is 100% or 95% or whatever, but it is already in that space.
I would add that caveat that the feedback also has to be relatively, on the timeline, relatively close by to the feature being developed. Right. So
that's for sure.
In network terms, because this is a flow problem, right? So continuous delivery solves a flow problem. And you can look at it like, to use a metaphor, and I'm sort of making this up as I go, so let me know if it's making sense. But it's like watching the Olympics through a live broadcast, right? So you want enough throughput to like identify which pixel on the screen is the ball, but also you want it to be low enough latency so that you have the sense that you're actually watching it live, right? So because I can do an extreme case in latency, I can say, well, our broadcast has a 2-month latency, right? So there is no, in our organization, there is no such thing as a real-time broadcast. Everything will be edited, everything will be processed, and then we will have to ship it, and then you can watch it in 2 months on our station. This is very typical in cable networks where real time was actually a complex problem and it required exclusive access to channels, right? So, but I want to come back to this network effect of there's latency and there's throughput, right? So what traditional processes, traditional organizations, startups especially, what they're focusing on is throughput. They want to say, well, how many features can a team of this size get done? They look at the roadmap. They have 10 things on the roadmap. How many of the 10 things can we get done in the next 3 months? Or by the next time we meet again for the next roadmap? And it sort of ingrains this culture of deadline-driven development where what you're looking for is throughput. It's like how many, like what does done mean? And then it opens up this can of worms of what does done mean? What does do we only value the throughput that was planned? How do we value unplanned throughput? How do we what kind of throughput is slack time? What kind of throughput is meeting time? So what kind of throughput is people going on vacation? Is that a good thing? Like what will the metric show? But really, what continuous delivery is about is on like an organizational level, to use the metaphor of the broadcast, is basically to say, no, what we value first and foremost is low latency. So as long as the broadcast is live, we don't need a lot of throughput because we don't need to record it. We will be recording it as a backup, but primarily what we care about is that it's live. If the screen freezes, what we want is for the screen to either catch up immediately to what's going on live so that you synchronize with your neighbor, or that you then continue from where you froze and then you then have a reasonable delay, but if you want, you can refresh and go back to the live stream, right? So these are generally in streaming and in video media, there's generally these two trade-offs. But what you're focusing on is low latency because you want to have this experience of you doing it live. And I think business owners also want this experience of, I just submitted a request, I want a new feature, and I want this feeling that the work is happening in real time, that it's not something I'll receive 6 months from now. And focusing on productivity from like the wrong end of project management can create this bias of accidentally or just clumsily focusing on throughput rather than latency. Continuous delivery is the effort of bringing the focus back to latency, so to low latency, so that work, the structure of the work, the productivity of the work matches the demand, so that I can request a new feature to develop today and it's going to be done next week, and then we can have a conversation around that. Rather than me having to come up with a long list, I create demand, and then 3 months from now, and 2 months from now, and 4 months from now, and 6 months from now, and and then this I get in June, and that I get in August, and because that's silly, because then there's no latency there. I don't know, any small change can be pushed forward, and I don't know why it's being pushed. That's a small change. Why is it taking 7 months? Oh, because it's lower priority than everything else up until August, right? So then that's a very difficult conversation to have, because then continuous delivery has no chance of existing in that kind of environment. And low latency.
I think that we shouldn't give the notion that when you do continuous delivery, you don't have any problems. I think you still have problems, but you are more in a flow, as you say, low latency. So even if you have problems, you react quicker to them, and it is less of a blame game and less of a budget problem and less of a marketing problem and follow-up problem. So it is more like you reduce stress in the team to a minimum, because everyone can react early on and doesn't have the problems, and you don't do too many things at the same time. So that is what I see very often.
And that's a latency problem. That's a latency problem, right? Because you have this idea of and you're probably going to say this, so just go ahead. Sorry.
I know. I just a week ago, I watched at a Jira board, and it was about a software which is going live soon, a large one. And I asked, okay, what's going on the board? It's a little bit like, how can we do the CD stuff? It's still working, and it was still 60 open to use tickets, right? So you can devs are free to pick these tickets, and there were still, I don't know, 10 in review or something like that, or pull request basically, and that's one of these big problems. So you basically give developers the opportunity to take a look into 60 different features while not being able to do one at a time. So which means that what you try to do there is that's actually a lazy thing from the project managers and all the kind of people who basically don't care about, I just give you everything, you take what you need. It's a little bit like that.
From my experience, I think that's an education problem. I think they're just misinformed.
Okay.
I mean, from my perspective,
I had another word in mind, but
from my perspective, they are doing their best because they check the internet, they check what's going on in the industry, and it's like, I have my column, I need to focus on my column.
Yeah, because the original idea of the backlog is different.
Of course.
The original idea of the backlog was that is the stuff the developers don't see. It is what the business does validate ideas before actually try to implement them.
Well, the original idea of the backlog was actually to stack rank work.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Stack. So that there's a stack. No, but it doesn't mean that the developers don't see the work. The point of the backlog is that if it is stack ranked, the developers only see the top of the stack. Right? So they don't concern themselves with how prioritization happens.
But
as long as the backlog guarantees that the most important thing is at the top.
But the backlog is not part of the actual process of production.
It is. I mean, it would be naive to say that nobody uses backlogs in 2025.
No.
There are continuous delivery teams who use backlogs without any issue.
I don't say not using backlogs. I say you have two different things. You have either the thing where you're focusing on right now, which is the production, the dev cycle, right? And there is no backlog. You shouldn't have a backlog there. You should have tickets
within a cycle. Within a cycle, there's no.
And then you have your backlog, and the developer should not be concerned during the dev cycle with backlog of other things. It doesn't make sense.
You say that in good faith, but I do see this happening, right? So again, when does an actively working team concern themselves with a backlog? Well, the answer is simple. We already mentioned it. When the latency is too high, right?
Yeah.
When the latency is too high, somebody needs to jump in and say, hey, it's backlogging time. You guys didn't deploy anything in a week. So now we need to reprioritize, right? So now the WIP limit is too high. Now we need to make a decision of,
Yeah, but why do you have so many things when you don't get them done? And that is what people need to learn. We're talking about how
Yeah.
can you as a smaller company implement that? And
Yeah.
the best way is to simply remove these things. These things should not be for the developers. So if you have an idea which you want to implement in 2 weeks, the developers should focus on what is to implement this week.
yeah, yeah.
So don't show the backlog to
Yeah.
the developers.
But
As simply
I mean,
simply as that.
to me, the biggest predictor of a sort of high-performing team isn't so much hiding the backlog. I think it can work. I think I see where you're coming from this. I mean, but again, I know you very well. We work a lot together, so it's easy for me to sort of work from your assumption stack.
Mhm.
But from like a purely educational perspective, I think what works the best regarding bringing on change, like bringing a team that doesn't do continuous delivery closer to continuous delivery, what works a lot better is either imposing or educating a WIP limit, right? So pulling a WIP limit. Because a lot of organizations that I see, especially if I coach an engineering manager, what they do is they push, they push the work and then they impose a WIP limit, which is nonsense, because if they then push 5 things on the backlog, it creates this illusion that now the WIP limit is 5. Right. So if I tell you, hey, do A, and then tomorrow I tell you, hey, do B, can you also do B once you're done with A? Hey, can you also do C when you're done with B and A? Hey, can you also do D when you're done with A and B and C?
But this is not a computer game. We are not pawns.
Yes, it creates the illusion that it's okay to work on B if work on A is blocked. That's the problem. Right? Because if work on A is blocked, what you should do as a team is to drop everything and unblock A. Because from our assumption from the backlog, A is the most important thing to work on right now. So it should be the most important thing for everybody on the team to work on. So if A is blocked, we don't distract ourselves. Because this activity-focused optimization for throughput at the cost of latency, it is creating a project management scheme where it says, well, the entire team can't work on A, so what is everybody else working on? And then everybody else is working on B, and then, well, everybody can't work on B. We have
that is the
problem. That is the problem.
Small
That's how
batches
the
in
problem.
that moment. That's large batch size problem.
That's
because if you have small batches, you don't have that problem. You don't block anything because it's going through in under an hour.
So that kind of behavior can also happen with low batch sizes, and it is still problematic. Right? It is still a form of organizational dysfunction because there isn't enough clarity regarding what the focus is and what focus means. Right? So here's an example from a startup. Right? So when I led task force in a startup, the startup was a very chaotic environment, huge backlog, very ambitious. Right? So a lot of funding. Yeah, but I mean, we were hiring like crazy. Like we had like what? 200% employee growth, right?
So every startup looks like that. So
yeah, it was a typical startup problems, right? It's like growing very explosively, huge, very ambitious roadmaps. And what worked very well for me, and today looking back, I now have a lot more literature to draw upon, like why did it work well? And what we did really well, accidentally, with a little bit of luck and a little bit of creativity, was flow engineering, essentially, right? So I worked very closely with the product owner and the CTO. I was tech lead / delivery manager, right? So I was sort of building the automation culture while also doing like technical TDD coaching and etc. Like I mean, I still do the same thing, but it's this sort of wearing many hats situation while also sort of leading the team. And it's the biggest concern was always, what does the work look like? Right, so you want something done, right? So we have an ambitious goal, and back then we were doing Dota 2 tournaments, so it was this crypto startup that was doing Dota 2 tournaments, and we said, well, what we want is we want to build a competitor that allows our product to be used for tournament automation and media collaboration on the next DreamHack. That was the sort of that was the North Star. Now, we didn't know exactly which next DreamHack, but one of the next DreamHacks, and there's one DreamHack. There used to be one DreamHack every year, but that was like the Super Bowl of our industry, where we could basically get the most media attention. And to bring that back to reality, well, we had to ask, well, what prevents us from doing that? Like, what do they need, right? So from my perspective, it was this idea of, well, I have 5 devs. Maybe by the time we're done, we will have 7 devs on the team, and then there's 20 more devs working on adjacent problems. This is a crypto startup, so there's a lot of fintech stuff going on, KYC, etc., marketing, experiments, typical startup stuff. And then the concern was, well, what does the work look like? Right? Because I don't want now these 7 people working on 7 things in parallel and hoping that we'll have something magical done by in 3 months' time. Because the problem with parallelizing and splitting up work is that you then have to merge it back together. And usually you merge it back together sort of very chaotically and sporadically when it's done, and everything will be done at a different time, which means that you then create these like individual tracks where developers don't work with each other. They don't talk to each other. They only talk to the PO, and then you mess with their freaking availability. As long as they don't merge their tracks back together, they're not available to be collaborated with, which means they're not talking to each other, which means they're not learning. If this is a very high risk, high speed, continuous delivery, ambitious project, then they're not present when most of the knowledge is being created and acquired, right? So they're completely isolated from the data of all the other 6 tracks that are not their swim lane. And that's the main problem. So that's the situation that I try to avoid by making sure to understand first, like what does the work look like? Does the work require us to build one large experiment, then do something completely seemingly unrelated? Like, do we have to do, I don't know, some media broadcast and then some tournament automation, which seem to be 2 different problems? Like, how do these problems correlate together? Which one do we do first? Do we need to do them in parallel? If we're not doing them in parallel, how do we, what's the latest that we can start that other thing? And that's what you need to plan. In order for continuous delivery to work, somebody needs to be thinking about, well, how can we focus? We need 3 things done, 3 unique, very disconnected things done, and then connect them together in a way that it makes sense. But we need to figure out how the team can work on only one thing at a time very well, and then move on to the next thing, right? So it is the slicing problem that is really at the heart of continuous integration and continuous delivery, where we need to decide as a team, like, okay, how can 7 people work on this one thing together? Because we want everybody's brain on this. How does this make sense? And anything that we split has to be merged together at some point, which creates a lot of organizational overhead, more meetings, more estimations, more planning. It's like, hey, I need to coordinate when you guys merge, and God forbid that it's back end and front end for the same thing, right? So that you don't want to have like 2 parallel batches going on for the same product. And the one thing that worked very well for me to be able to do that and not lose my freaking sanity was to be, and you laugh because I know that this happens a lot, is to just simply
left the
say,
startup for one reason, right?
yeah. It is primarily the work has to be understood, and the work will change, right? So the work has a certain shape, right? So you say, well, this is an ambitious goal, but these are the core elements. And in order for us to sort of user test these are the core features. And then developers will start fantasizing about, oh, I'm very good at that. I want to do that. I want to work on this. I want to work on this. And to really rein it back in, to rein the ambition back in and say, hey, let's not do too many things in parallel. Let's do this one together first. Then somebody can stay there for a week. And then let's do this one together. And then somebody can oversee that. Somebody can become sort of home somewhere. but then I need you to pull you back, right? So we will have a stable team, but the team will not be static, right? So the team will be stable because we are building this relationship of we are working together all the time, but I don't want any one person to own something. I don't want this sort of staticness to kick in. It's like, oh, I built it, so I will stay there, and you guys continue with the other features. So there is this constant, from my perspective, what I had to do is there was this constant gentle nudging going on of, yes, you built it, but now you continue, you're still part of the team. Like, because otherwise you have this like sharding going on. It's like you have this team, everybody works together on the first feature, and then somebody gets left behind maintaining, right? And then
Do
you build another.
still coach this these days?
Continue. What's the context for your question? So I know how to answer.
The solution you found for that type of problem, do you still coach it like that these days? Or do you
This is how I do it because I'm sort of very much dynamic in the way that I work. When I coach, usually the leaders have their own leadership style, and yes, I do coach it, but there has to be that underlying desire from the person I'm coaching, from the leader that I'm coaching, that yes, actually, you know what, there's like a huge overlap in our styles, and I want to do it in this style. Generally, I think my clients nowadays are a little bit more conservative, a little bit more stable scale-up territory rather than VC-funded startup. But I think that's just a market thing, because the reality is there are many different ways of doing continuous delivery. As we said at the beginning. So as long as we sort of have, we want to make sure that the engineering culture sticks, but that we can reform teams as needed. Right, so that there isn't any unnecessary siloing going on. Because if the shape of the work changes, the shape of the team should go and match the work. That's kind of the point, right? So when you say there's a new project coming along, well, I'm disbanding all teams and I'm reshaping the teams to the new project. That's really important. But what I don't want to do is to see that, hey, there's 5 people here and there's chaos. Maybe I need more structure for them. I need teams for them. It's like, no, like maybe the work is chaotic. Maybe the roadmap is nonsensical, and that's what we need to work on first. But don't what I do coach with a lot of leaders is I always tell them, don't shape the teams. Like, don't do the cutting shaping. Don't break up the teams. Let the teams break up themselves. There will be natural
one context. So if you have another context, you can split teams, but only for context, so that you have 2 teams then.
Yeah,
so it's not like you don't have sub teams. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, like sub teams are people being on multiple teams at the same time, or like being like task forces and teams within teams.
Make sense at all.
And no, that doesn't make sense. I always tell them that don't do that, because this originates from this idea that there's a backlog, but behind the backlog there's like 3 different stakeholders, and each stakeholder is a source of demand for software to be produced. So normally, what can happen at the worst case scenario is that one stakeholder requires 2 teams to build what they want, and then each other stakeholder needs 1 team exclusively. And then you have like this weird mishmash problem of, hold on, we have 3 stakeholders demanding 4 teams worth of work. We have 3 teams. How do we split up this problem? Right? And then that becomes really annoying to handle if the teams don't match the sort of demand requirements of stakeholders. Because normally what you would say is, okay, these 2 teams are now serving this stakeholder, and then this one team we disband, and then we hire new people and see if we can serve the other 2.
That brings me to a point. I just had that today again, and that's so often the case.
This happens a lot, and usually leaders err too conservatively on this disbanding side, because you need to disband the team if you cannot satisfy demand. You need to be very careful not to
there's another
make this team static.
expression. It is like I was talking with a dev today, another company. I was talking about what's going on with that context where we have there some kind of joint venture thing where we're working together. And that should be something you should be able to ask everyone of a specific company, or at least the team. And you have that quite often, and that is not only in that company. It is in a lot of companies. One developer doesn't know about a feature of another developer. So that's that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why is that
They don't know
bad?
what the focus is. They don't know what
So-
the team is working on. Yeah.
Exactly. That the problem is that you have too much parallel work, and which
Yes.
means that it is like, oh, we are a small company. That's a startup, so we have startup topic. So
Yeah.
we have too
But it's
much
ironic.
work for.
This is exactly the problem that shouldn't be happening in a small company because the company is very small. So it should be very
Now
easy to know.
it is because of the survival aspect. So
Yeah.
what is the best book for startups, for software development? It is the survival guide, and it's it is how do you actually survive them, because startups have one big problem, and that is value and creating money. And so business is often pressuring to create more in also schedule more,
more
so
throughput.
more study.
Yeah, more throughput. Yeah.
No, it's not. And that's so devs are
Yeah.
like very hesitant. You ask a dev a question, and the dev doesn't even want to talk to the colleagues in that moment.
Mhm.
Just leave me alone. I just need to get my stuff done. And that is,
Mhm.
first of all, siloing. That is parallel work. That is burnout proneness.
Yeah.
It
That's
will
too
lead to
much
burnout on
throughput
some point.
pressure, right? So like the
Exactly.
demand, the real demand on the pipeline, on the work, is not transparent, right? So you say, I need this much throughput because I think that's our capacity, but in reality, the demand on work is much higher than the actual capacity. And if it's not transparent, you just, hey, nothing is getting done. Can you guys work more, please? And then you get just going down this death spiral where you accumulate organizational debt, burnout, and technical debt. And then the natural reaction from the stakeholders is like, hey, why are things so slow? Can we go faster? Faster means more parallel work, more tickets in the backlog, and then you just get stuck.
I just posted a link about the average developer approach. That is basically, it was an answer.
I have a question regarding the book.
That was a jump. That was a joke.
James says, I thought you were going to say
that's more that kind of survival book.
Yeah, no, that's an actual survival book.
That is more for engineering managers in large companies who fucked up and need to hide in the bushes, right? That's for those kind of people. How you survive in the wild.
But it is relevant. Martin Fowler and Ken Beck have recently popularized this metaphor for, is your organization in a forest or is it in a desert, right? So is it surrounded by, is your engineering team operating in a scarcity mindset or in an abundance mindset, right? So if you're operating in a scarcity mindset, then every feature, every plan, every meeting, every week is about survival, right? So we need to get this done, and everything's on the line, and we don't have time to do, and there's this sort of short-termism going on in this endless cycle.
In both worlds, you can do CD.
Yeah, and in both worlds, you can do CD, and they come the different contexts, because you said context matters. The two contexts come with two different types of problems. A startup that is sort of in this desert sort of survival mode context, what they are struggling with is that most of the software they're building is not worth building. But at the same time, they need to validate their ideas very quickly on the market. But you don't validate your ideas quickly by building more things. You validate them by lowering the latency of how long it takes for you to validate an idea, right? So for your startup to survive, you need to become very good at validating your ideas quickly and economically. That doesn't mean that you're increasing throughput, because you might disillusion yourself and create this fake capacity when you say, oh, we can validate 7 ideas with 7 devs in 7 weeks, and then we get nothing for 7 weeks, and then in 7 weeks we get 7 validated ideas. That is nonsense. That is extremely risky. What you need to do is use those 7 devs to validate one of those ideas in 10 days. That's continuous delivery, or less, or 5 days, or 2 days. To maybe one dev can't come up with how to validate, with any kind of idea of how to validate it in 10 days, but maybe a group of 4 people, the right 4 people working together.
It is even better than you say in real. So you have so people when listen to that, especially CEOs of startups with some devs, and devs know the CTOs, CEOs, and CTOs as well. They think, oh my god, that's not enough. We can't survive like that. In reality, it's like one main feature. but you have
Yeah.
a lot of small things going. I have 1 hour of time. I just do that one. I just do that one, and that's the beauty of continuous delivery, is that you have actually more in the end
More
that you
time to
actually
do that.
think.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
But less than you would
Yeah.
basically imagine yourself in some kind of wish list type of impossible thing. And that is important to understand. So
Yeah.
if you practice that, you will be surprised how
How
much
much more time you have. Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
much less stressed you are with that,
Yeah.
how much more involved that is. And so you are already
Mhm.
working on the next idea while implementing the first one, and then you
Yeah.
go to the next
And
one.
you
when
have
this is
excess
done.
capacity.
You have
Yeah.
always something to do, and that is actually something very good. And what I wanted to say, a topic before regarding that is
Mhm.
the average developer. This is what I was posting. The average developer approach. That's what I call it. So
Yeah.
average developer means non-senior and non-junior. So if you have something for only seniors or a siloed person, and
Mhm.
only that person can do that, you basically make it impossible that you can basically give smaller tasks, or have one bigger task and split it into smaller and provide that in a team. You can't do that. So you basically cannot react to anything, because only specific people can do specific things. So in
Mhm.
your example of 777, it would mean that every of those developers you assign is the only person who can work on these things. So if
Mhm.
one is missing, one entire lane
Mhm.
is missing. So you can't just simply put another one, because
Mhm.
you have already set the bar too high. And
Mhm.
that's one of the others. So you need to keep it as simple
Yeah.
as possible and as frequent as possible. That is important.
But again, it comes from this sort of fear of missing out, and potentially this sort of wish or desire to measure individual performance rather than the performance of the team, right? Because ultimately in a startup, what you need to measure is the performance of the product engineering organization, right? So there is some level, a very large, non-trivial, sizable workforce of the entire org, which is probably 80% in a startup, that is handling product engineering, and you need to make sure that they're as effective as possible together as one unit. James has a cool comment. James says, I'd also recommend The Lean Startup, the book, The Lean Startup. I'm not sure if people are aware, but my team at IMVU, and it would be great if you could explain what IMVU is. My team at IMVU, where I worked as an engineer and later as a VP of engineering and operations, coined the term continuous deployment. Interesting. And was the first practicing Lean startup. Oh, that's cool. He continues saying, we practiced chunk-based development and had to build up our own infrastructure to support CD, some of which Eric Ries writes about in the Lean Startup. Yeah, Lean Startup, also great book. Oh yeah, you mentioned Lean Startup. And for example, our cluster immune system. Thanks for hosting this conversation and continuing it. You're welcome. Thanks for sharing your experience in chat. We definitely welcome live collaboration. Awesome, James. Thank you.
I would have a quick, because we have some people here in chat right now, and LinkedIn continuously breaks down.
I just looked at the time. We should also wrap.
I would have a question to all of the audience. If we would focus more the streams every Wednesday on Twitch and using actually the Twitch chat and chat functionality, would that be something of interest for you? So would you be happy to switch over
Let's
to
try
Twitch
it
entirely?
Let's try it.
Let's
try it. I mean, why ask them? Let's just try it. Let's get real feedback rather than simulate.
Feedback. We have talked about this. Remember? Feedback.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, tomorrow you're doing an AMA. Should we maybe announce that?
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing an AMA. Same topic, actually. Ask me anything, but more for actually the thing. How is it called? The Substack community. It is tomorrow. Actually,
5 p.m.
Same hour as now.
Yeah, 5 p.m., 5:30 ish.
5 p.m. CET. So it would start half an hour back from right now. And you need to go to Substack for that. That's a little bit complicated. Maybe I have the link inside here.
Yeah, we did notice that it's very difficult to sort of watch LinkedIn and type at the same time. Plus, the video/audio broadcast isn't popping up in every single one of your audio tabs in LinkedIn. If you're one such person who
I just posted that link. You need to have that link in order to see that it's actually starting.
That's but we have to mention. I tested it yesterday. Substack. You can only watch the stream on your phone. So even if you open it in the Substack app on your desktop, you will have to
It's
watch it on
possible
your
that
phone.
we only do that once and then you're back to some other
But
streaming
I
platforms.
tried it yesterday, and there was something a little bit more, I don't know, like the vibe was different. A lot more people interacted, liked, typed, so it was very active. Maybe it has something to do with holding the phone in your hand and sort of interacting more. I don't know. Maybe on the desktop people are all tabbed and just listening. I don't know. So that's something that works. That's worth experimenting with, which is why we're experimenting with these other
Finally, I
technologies.
have a reason to use my phone tripod.
Oh yeah, I need a tripod. I wanted to do a quick stream yesterday, and it was an hour later. I noticed while watching the recording. I noticed it was an hour, so my hand was on fire from holding the freaking phone in front of my light setup. Adrian, let's wrap. If we were to sort of condense today's episode about the pitfalls, let's say, or what to be careful about when you're doing continuous delivery in a startup, how would you summarize this in like a few sentences? If you had a triage, prioritize.
Yeah. Stay in small batch sizes. Stay with trunk-based development. Connect development and biz as early as possible. Make it one team, one big team, and make sure that it's clear what you actually work on, which will reduce stress and basically increase throughput in that moment. So overall, you will validate your ideas early on because that is important for startups. We're talking about startups and small tech today. You need to have that now. You need to be competitive on the market, and while doing that, you will be actually able to do that. The larger your batch sizes, or AKA tickets, will become, the more complicated the process will become and the less throughput you will have. That's a natural thing. And even though if a small batch doesn't mean a full feature, it can be a part of a feature which is even unfinished. Just work it in a way, and that's something we haven't talked about today, how to actually ensure that nothing breaks technically with things like TDD, good continuous integration, good testing, good methods of working.
Yeah, we didn't touch on that, and that is also maybe we can touch on that on a TDD related or continuous integration related topic.
So you can do actually CD without TDD. It's not part of the very essentials.
Oh, definitely.
But it is.
Yes.
It is recommended even on minimum viable CD, but it is not part of the very basics of CD. So you can do it without testing, but especially when you are a startup, you can maybe do that in the first weeks to get running, but on some point you need to keep up with testing, because as soon as you hit market, you hit your clients, you can't keep that confidence without having tests in place. That's the reality.
If I were to summarize it, I would say focus on your latency. If you have a huge backlog, go over it as a team, one at a time, because you don't want to spend too much time on any one ticket, because that is what will kill your productivity and transparency of what your team is working on. And in particular, if you're not doing TDD or writing tests, then the inspection will be your main bottleneck, right? Like, it won't harm your throughput as much, in relative terms, but it will be annoying to sort of, you could be working with a latency of hours as a team to finish something and get something out. But if you are manually testing something, generally manual testing of a feature cannot be parallelized because it's slow, and several people testing manually in parallel aren't making the process faster, which is why it is one of the primary things that is being automated, right? So the teams will be annoyed with each other working only on one thing if at the end the inspection is manual, because they'll be twiddling their thumbs waiting for the person to finish freaking, and then it will encourage the behavior of, while you're testing, I'll start working on something else, and then you spiral back into this large batch size behavior, right? So it is a normal pressure that if you want to have low latency, you will have to sort of automate and sort of remove the human from the inspection parts, and front roll them as investment into, how do we know this works? How can we, in technical terms, write down that this works?
But this is a topic for
and it's a completely different topic.
Sessions, actually.
Yeah, but start with lowering latency, lowering batch size. Work together on one thing as a team, and you'll notice that you'll have a lot more time, especially in a small organization, in a startup.
Great.
Thank you. Awesome.
That was a good session. Good feedback from everyone.
Yeah,
Really
audio
showed
issues
that we're coming
aside,
today.
let's test next time before the stream if this persists, because it took us a little bit from the show. Just vibes at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay, since last thing, since I'm going straight into YouTube right now since 2 months now. It's working very well, and probably Twitch it will be as well on some point in time. So just for the snackable stuff, what I'm doing, and so we're doing that here on Twitch anyway.
Mhm.
And just for you people to know that Twitch will become more of a thing for us, YouTube as well.
Yeah.
So feel free to follow us there. That's actually a kind of interesting thing. Would be nice to have more feedback because it is always great. Especially you see that there's conversations on LinkedIn and all this kind of stuff, and you make content around that, and oftentimes people simply don't give you feedback then, but they read it, and several days later they write you a DM about that. But in my opinion, we should focus more on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or even Twitch during a session on live conversations. So
Yeah.
by that, I want to motivate everyone who's consuming these kind of things. Just ask something. There are no stupid questions. There is nothing obsolete. Even if you're not agreeing, it does. So no one will blame you because of that. This is not a blame game here. That is more like a cooperative thing. So we have all our opinions, but we are not biased, right? They are two different part of two different shoes here.
Oh, we try not to be. I think there's always a little bit of bias, but we're very kind.
And you
You know,
can
we
say I'm doing it like that, but tell me how you are actually going to do that. For example, Sanjeev was joining today. He was writing an official comment under my post about how he is actually doing this kind of things regarding do you actually deploy on Friday? So
Yeah.
he had a different thing how he's actually doing that, and I'm fine with that. So I don't say, hey, if it's working for you, it's fine. So I'm talking about companies for which companies it's not working and why continuous delivery makes sense to implement there. There might be other ways as well, of course, right? So we have used ways before continuous delivery was coined, right? So
Well,
let's stick with that.
if we were to wrap the episode, I think it's also worth mentioning that continuous delivery is not the same thing as continuous deployment, right? So what's
Have I said
important for
continuous
us?
deployment?
No, but I'm sort of highlighting this idea that
Yeah.
deploying on Friday does not mean that we're delivering. Like, we should be delivering as soon as possible. Delivery means we have closed the feedback loop. We have received feedback on our work. That doesn't mean that it was deployed to everybody at the same time that we received feedback, right? So it just means that there is a clear feedback pipeline, because it's what we want primarily is feedback. If I get feedback from 10 users, I don't care that it's deployed to the other 9 million. If I have 9 million users, what I want is 10 users to use this software so that I know whether it's safe to deploy to the other 9 million. One would be continuous delivery, the other one would be continuous deployment, and then you have this sort of shift of, is this red green, or is this blue green, is this canary style? And some people use staging for that. There are active people, or you're dogfooding the product and you basically have your employees using the product, but it's not deployed. It's not
we have that
deployed.
same, we're using a staging environment for this.
Exactly.
And
for
there
that,
20, 30 people working on that one. And
yes.
Basically every evening, the delta is going to production. That's how what happens.
And you're basically deploying every day, every hour to that environment, so that then hey, if I were to deploy this, it would be completely safe. And that gives you that freedom to deploy on Friday. It doesn't mean you force every deployment to be on Friday because you're a risk taker, but it basically means that there are SLAs and SLOs for our uptime and our stability. And we know if I hit deploy now, I will get immediate feedback whether it's actually matching my assumptions. Plus, nobody will have to sort of do any kind of weird things on Saturday.
There are platforms where you can't simply deploy. For example, app stores, platforms like Steam or something like that. You can't just push everyday changes there. There are games like modern currently on Path of Exile, for example, which is doing continuous delivery in a form. So you have every day you have updates, and there are other games which give you every 3 weeks, maybe one single patch. Right?
Path of Exile is interesting because they are running their own platform and then they are working on Steam. And they have 2 different games right now, 2 different versions of Path of Exile. So their rollouts are actually different on each platform, but each player has a preferred choice. So each player only knows about their own. So the Steam players only know about the Steam version. the native players only know about the native version. So it's a very interesting continuous delivery setup that they have. Maybe we should do a case study on that.
Shall we play a bit?
We could maybe play it on stream. Yeah. Let's do it.
Let's do game streaming.
Next time. I have a good enough computer. I have a good enough computer now to stream and play at the same time.
I actually recommend this device. That is great.
No. I'm not. I need a keyboard. Anyway.
It's great. It's really great.
Nice. Okay, I like this. We should definitely talk about this and discuss
Too many
this.
keyboards already, right?
It'll definitely be a good conversation side topic for getting it onto Twitch.
So Dennis and Adrian are playing together games on stream after that stream. That's a new stream type we do then.
That's cool. If we have time. I mean, we're busy dads, right? So we're
you just became dad, right? It's like not just, but yeah.
It's been 2 years.
Oh,
I need to go. Okay, let's wrap on that.
Goodbye, guys. See
That's
you.
also a different conversation. Ciao.
Ciao. Shall I wrap up? Yeah, I wrap up. Thank you.